Somewhere beneath the streets of modern Alexandria, Egypt, archaeologists have found sealed underground vaults containing scrolls that shouldn't exist, texts that were supposed to have burned, astronomical charts that challenge what historians thought they knew, medical treatises so advanced they don't fit the timeline we've been taught. They haven't finished excavating. They don't know what else is down there, and that detail, that quiet, unsettling detail, is the most honest introduction I can give you to what we're about to discuss, because the story of the Library of Alexandria is not the story you were taught. It's not a single dramatic fire. It's not one villain. It's not even primarily about books. It's about what happens when knowledge becomes dangerous, when the wrong ideas in the wrong hands threaten the wrong institutions. And it's about what was inside those walls that was so threatening that it was destroyed not once, not twice, but repeatedly, across 7 centuries, by Caesar, by Christian mobs, by caliphs. As if each new power that rose understood instinctively that what was stored in Alexandria could not be allowed to survive. The question nobody asks is why? What was actually in there? That's what this video is about. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what Alexandria actually was. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. He was 24 years old, and unlike every conqueror before him, he didn't just want territory. He wanted knowledge. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Egyptian coast, not primarily as a military base, but as an intellectual capital, a place where the wisdom of every civilization on Earth would be gathered into one location. After Alexander died, his general Ptolemy I took control of Egypt and built what became known as the Museion, the Temple of the Muses, and within it, the Great Library. The ambition behind it was staggering. Ships arriving at Alexandria's harbour were searched, not for weapons, not for contraband, for manuscripts. Every scroll found on every vessel was taken to the library to be copied. The original was kept. The copy was returned to the owner. Ptolemy II sent letters to every king and ruler in the known world: Persia, India, Carthage, Rome, requesting their texts. He borrowed the official Athenian state copies of Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides, paying an enormous deposit to guarantee their return. He kept them, forfeited the deposit, and filed them in the library. By its peak, the Library of Alexandria held an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. To put that in context, the next largest library in the ancient world had 200,000. This was not a library. This was the closest thing the ancient world ever produced to a complete record of human knowledge, and it contained things that have never been seen again. Now here is where the story becomes something other than history. Most people know about the Hermetic texts, the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the figure we discussed in a previous video. What most people don't know is where those texts came from. Much of the Hermetic literature was lost during the burning of the Library of Alexandria. But more specifically, the Library of Alexandria was the place where these texts were being studied, translated, and preserved by scholars who understood that what they were handling was not philosophy in the conventional sense. It was a transmission. The Hermetic writings were not texts for the masses, but often for initiates, hinting at secrets that could transform the soul and unlock the very workings of the cosmos. These were the texts that Pythagoras studied when he went to Egypt, that Plato studied, that almost every Greek philosopher of significance made the pilgrimage to Alexandria to access. It had long been accepted as a known historical fact that both Plato and Pythagoras studied in Egypt, and scholars assumed they must have studied in the schools of Egyptian priests. Think about what that means. The foundational philosophy of Western civilization, Plato's theory of forms, Pythagoras' mathematics, the Stoic principles that shaped Marcus Aurelius, all of it traces back to knowledge that was being transmitted in Egypt. Knowledge that was housed, at its most concentrated, in the Library of Alexandria, and most of it is gone. But here's the deeper question. What specifically was being taught in the Egyptian mystery schools that Pythagoras and Plato traveled thousands of miles to access? We have fragments. We have references. We have what survived. The Corpus Hermeticum, the collection of Hermetic writings that made it out, speaks of 7 principles governing reality, of the relationship between consciousness and the physical world, of the nature of the soul and its relationship to divine intelligence. But the texts that were lost, the 40 books attributed directly to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, whose Greek name became Hermes, those described something far more specific. The Book of Thoth was kept in a golden box in the inner sanctuary of the temple, and only the highest initiate of the Hermetic Arcanum Mystery School had the key to it. It is said the book described the key to immortality, the process achieved through awakening certain areas of the brain, similar to Buddhist monks' practices. Read that carefully. The activation of specific areas of the brain through deliberate practiced technique. 5,000 years before neuroscience, this is what was in Alexandria, not just poetry and mathematics, but a precise, documented understanding of human consciousness that our civilization is only now beginning to approach through the lens of modern science. And it burned. Now, here is where the standard story begins to fall apart. Most people believe the Library of Alexandria was destroyed in a single fire. Julius Caesar, 48 BCE. Fire spreads from the harbour. The library burns. End of story. That is not what happened. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was not a moment. It was a process, a deliberate centuries-long erasure. And understanding who did it and when and why tells you more about the nature of power and knowledge than almost anything else in recorded history. Whatever the level of destruction in Caesar's fire, the Library of Alexandria survived as an institution, surfacing occasionally in the historical record. Whether it was partially preserved or partially rebuilt, it continued to lose prestige as Alexandria declined in importance during Roman rule. So Caesar's fire, the famous one, damaged the harbour warehouses, possibly some scrolls awaiting cataloguing. The library itself survived. Mark Antony later gave Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls to replenish what was lost. The library continued. Then came the Roman emperors. Alexandria was sacked by Aurelian in 270 CE, sacked again by Diocletian. In 365 AD, the city was devastated by an earthquake and tsunami, accelerating changes to the coastline that eventually submerged the entire royal quarter. The library was weakened, diminished, but not gone. Then came the moment that historians argue about most. 391 CE, Theophilus I, the Christian patriarch of Alexandria, ordered that the Serapeum's pagan temple be destroyed and replaced with a church. The Serapeum was the daughter library of the Great Library, holding approximately 10% of the total collection. More importantly, it held the esoteric texts, the Hermetic writings, the works of the mystery schools, the texts that the newly dominant Christian church had already declared heretical. During his reign, the Temple of Serapis was converted into a Christian church, and many documents were likely destroyed then. What followed the destruction of the Serapeum is one of the most revealing moments in the entire history of human knowledge. A woman named Hypatia, Hypatia of Alexandria was a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, the daughter of Theon, the last documented head of the library. Some historians consider Hypatia herself the last head librarian. She was teaching, publicly, openly, astronomy, mathematics, Neoplatonic philosophy, the integrated tradition of science and mysticism that had been developing in Alexandria for 7 centuries. She was also advising Orestes, the Roman prefect, who was in conflict with the new Christian bishop Cyril, Theophilus's nephew, over the direction of the city. In 415 CE, a Christian mob, reportedly incited by Bishop Cyril, dragged Hypatia from her carriage in the street. They killed her. Her death is widely recognized as the symbolic end of Alexandria as an ancient center of learning, not because of what it did to the buildings, because of what it signaled about ideas. The most sophisticated mind in Alexandria, the last living guardian of a tradition stretching back 5,000 years, was murdered in the street, and the knowledge she carried died with her. Or did it? Here is where the story takes a turn that the official history doesn't spend much time on. One hypothesis suggests that surviving scholars secretly transported key texts to other regions, preserving the knowledge in hidden or lesser-known libraries across the globe. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a historically documented pattern. When institutions fall and knowledge becomes dangerous, the people who carry it find ways to preserve it. The Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi in 1945, buried in clay jars in the Egyptian desert, hidden from the same Christian authorities who destroyed the Serapeum, prove that early scholars were actively hiding texts they knew would be burned. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947, prove the same thing happened with Jewish esoteric tradition. People buried what mattered, in caves, in jars, under temple floors, and the Hermetic tradition that came out of Alexandria did not disappear. The initiates left Egypt and brought the Book of Thoth to another land. Where it is now, no one knows, though supposedly the chain of succession of Grand Master since Thoth has remained unbroken. The Rosicrucians are said to be descended from his school, while the Freemasons are descended from the school founded by Solomon. This is why the Freemasons use the imagery they use, the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye, the symbols of builders and initiates. This is why the Rosicrucians emerged in 17th century Europe, claiming to possess ancient Egyptian wisdom. This is why Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake in 1600, was teaching Hermetic philosophy drawn directly from the texts that came out of Alexandria. The knowledge didn't die. It went underground, and every time it surfaced, the same response followed: suppression, destruction, and in the most extreme cases, murder. Which tells you something important. Ideas that are truly harmless don't get burned. Ideas that are truly powerless don't get suppressed. The 700 years of sustained effort to destroy what was housed in Alexandria by Caesar, by Theophilus, by Cyril, was not carelessness, it was fear. The specific fear of what happens when ordinary people have access to knowledge about the nature of consciousness, about the principles governing reality, about the tools for developing what the Hermetic tradition called the higher mind. Because a person who understands how their own mind works, who has access to the techniques for developing perception, will, and clarity, is a person who is significantly harder to control. And every power structure in history has understood that, even if they never said it out loud. The Library of Alexandria represented something that has never been fully recreated. A place where the knowledge of Egypt, Babylon, Persia, India, and Greece existed together in one location, cross-referencing, synthesizing, building on each other. The Hermetic texts sitting beside the Indian Vedas, Egyptian astronomical charts sitting beside Babylonian mathematics, Greek philosophy sitting beside the mystery school initiations of Thoth, a complete picture of what human beings had understood about the nature of reality, accumulated over thousands of years. And what replaced it? 7 centuries of what historians call the Dark Ages, a period of such profound intellectual regression that basic knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics had to be painstakingly recovered, often from Arab scholars who had preserved Greek texts that Europe had forgotten existed. That regression did not happen by accident. It happened because the knowledge that sustained it was systematically removed. So what does this mean for you right now? Not philosophically, practically. The tradition that came out of Alexandria, the Hermetic principles, the mystery school teachings, the integrated understanding of consciousness and reality, it didn't disappear, it was preserved, hidden in plain sight inside the symbolism of secret societies, inside the writings of Renaissance philosophers who rediscovered the corpus hermeticum, inside the work of Jung, who spent his career mapping the unconscious using frameworks that trace directly back to Egyptian initiatory tradition, inside the work of Tesla, who described reality in terms of frequency and resonance using language almost identical to the Hermetic texts written 2,000 years before him. The knowledge survived. What was lost was the accessibility, the open, public, integrated institution where any scholar could walk in and access everything. What we have now are fragments, preserved by people who understood their value, hidden by people who understood their danger, and passed forward through centuries of suppression to people willing to look for them. That's why you're here. That's why this channel exists. Not to give you a surface version, not to make ancient knowledge comfortable and marketable, but to show you what's actually there in the historical record, in the archaeological evidence, in the texts that survived, and let you decide what to do with it. The archive is open. It always has been. For those who know where to look, subscribe to Inner Archive. New video every week. The knowledge doesn't disappear, it just waits.